The game? Final Fantasy III. The year? 1990. A year that brings with it the crisp image of boy bands, girl groups, campy horror, and some would say campier drama blockbusters. Not to mention the media that made millennials what they are, for better or worse. This decade also brought with it major improvements to the toy and games market, nowhere near limited to the release of Final Fantasy III in 1990. In fact, 5 of the Final Fantasy titles would be published within this decade. This also marks the release of the very first Final Fantasy to the North American market, which would take some by storm, who would then await the release of the next 2 titles that would not get localized for quite some time. Warning. This video contains impossibly straightforward dissections of the plot and characters of Final Fantasy III, both the Pixel Remaster and the 3D DS versions. The previous games in the franchise will also be discussed, and the video may feature vague comparisons to future games. If you'd like to play any to all of the games discussed within the video, feel free to pause and find your way back sometime in the future. I personally would recommend setting aside 80 hours just for Final Fantasy III. What that means to you is none of my business. I consider this game the last of its age for several reasons. Some obvious, others found within the telling of the story itself. A game that focuses on the coming of the next. Aged-down heroes that are saving the world from a threat much older than themselves, that utilizes much of what the Square team had learned from the previous 2 releases within the series. But it does manage to have its own charm, shockingly not falling into many of the pitfalls that more chronologically focused franchises might, while also managing to display several new mechanics and trialing the brandy-dandy new job system that would leave its mark on the franchise forever. Oh, thank God. Speaking of, I think we finally capped out White Mage, so it's time for a change. Now with that out of the way, and a brand new job to level, let's get to it. Originally programmed for, you guessed it, the family computer in Japan, Final Fantasy III was released on April 27th to overall good reviews. Again, the North American market would not be made privy to the storyline of 3 for another 16 years. But not to worry, us snot-nosed English speakers had just been given access to Final Fantasy I, with enough grinding to keep us busy until the release of 2. You know, what we now call 4. A far superior game in the minds of many, although I personally am very glad they didn't keep these, I wouldn't call them gems, more like shiny, normal rocks away from our grubby little hands forever. This is the last entry point in the series written by Kenji Terada, the tearjerker responsible for much of 1 and 2's vulnerability and plot hooks. And while his departure from the next project may not have been a smooth, heartfelt goodbye, it had much more to do with the next big discussion surrounding this game, the rise in new gaming technology. Leadership at Square felt the turning of the tides with the announcement of the Super Famicom to be released later that year. Unlike the last game, in which the staff is quoted as being given too little time and too few resources to result in a competent translation, this game was given no resources for potential international release. Instead, the team turned their focus on catching up with the technological new wave that was upon them. And between when the game was originally released and when North America would receive the 3D handheld version of Final Fantasy III for the Nintendo DS, several core changes were made to the plot and storyline. This includes, but is nowhere near limited to, the inclusion of the token girl character, several in-game cutscenes, as well as plenty of the usual changes to the gameplay itself. But let's not bog ourselves down talking about all of those changes in the absence of context. Let's get to that plot summary. Arise, these sweet little babies, who get thrown from their lives of moderate comfort into the impending unknown to battle the coming of darkness when assigned warrior of light by a sentient stone. Hold your horses. I know we normally jump directly into plot summary after I do that whole Arise bit, but Final Fantasy III has a pretty unique problem. One I did literally just mention. That being that this game has had very meaningful changes made to its plot across its variant releases. So, while I thought we wouldn't need to put in context to it for quite a while, I originally played the 3D DS version for the video capture for this essay, which unfortunately is the most different amongst them, having almost a completely different opening from both the original and the Pixel Remaster. The only other version normally recommended to players brave enough to romp around this busy work disguised as a playground is the Pixel Remaster version, a far more faithful interpretation of the original story, but with all of the gameplay updates and balancing act that we've come to expect with the Pixel Remaster editions.
Now, before you ask if I played the exact same game 2 times in a row just to hand-select comparisons for you nerds, I want you to contemplate what kind of person you think would finish a game and then turn around and play the exact same one.
We will primarily be discussing the plot-heavy 3D version for a majority of this video, so consider this the Freelancers version. Don't worry if you don't know what that means. You guessed it. We'll get there. Okay, let's run that back. Arise, sweet babies, sentient stone, warriors of light. Our journey starts with Luneth, the courageous teen freelancer exploring the Altair caves near his hometown of when the whole continent is shaken by an unexplainable earthquake.
An unexplainable earthquake, your quick mind retorts. Perhaps the technologically advanced races of simply do not understand tectonic plates, you must be thinking. Until you find out the continent floats. So, your theory doesn't really hold up. Unlike this landmass, but tis.
Please clap.
Anyway, after stumbling around a cave on his own, Luneth comes across the Crystal of Wind that bestows upon him the title of Warrior of Light, and tells him he's solely responsible for the welfare of the world. With the literal weight of the world on his shoulders, Luneth is also tasked with vibe-checking 3 other children who will join him in his quest to find the world's equilibrium. After informing his adopted parents of his newfound responsibility, Luneth is given free rein to explore and do cool, heroic things, like this. His first go-to is his ride-or-die adopted brother, the wonderfully shy and tender Ark, who at this very moment is being bullied by the other identical children of their hometown for talking about the rumor of ghosts. After Luneth's mere countenance scares off the others, Ark runs away to prove he isn't a burden to his bestest bro, which forces Luneth to chase him down before he joins the team. Assuming he knows where his BFF has run off to, or he too has heard these ghost allegations, Luneth trips down to Kazus, to start their journey together. Upon entering the town, you find your baffled compatriot, and exactly what you've been told to expect. A bunch of ghosts. Turns out a few towns have been cursed by a djinn, which you can learn from any of a series of cursed local old-timers in a local bar, each laying down new details and facts on the kiddos. Ghost Sid, already showing his face, well, his shade, offers the duo his airship and points them towards the town's blacksmith, Taka. Taka is a worried father who is apparently the only person capable of crafting the mythal rings, purportedly required to hurt said curse bestower, but not in his less-than-flesh form. He tasks our boys with finding his daughter, who apparently disappeared unnoticed prior to the Great Ghostening.
I'm not sure he looked like at all. Granted, the town has had a lot going on.
But a quick trip to the local desert and aboard Sid's airship brings you face to face with an apparent hijacking in the making, and Refia, the girl in question, and the rebellious apprentice at her father's shop. The sass is palpable. The girl is girling. So with nowhere to turn for help, learning Refia does not give a shit about her studies and cannot craft us the ring we need, we trip over to Susanne. Another kingdom that has reported similar ghostification. And just like that, at the gates of the castle, we find our 4th and most standoffish member of the team, Dingus. Ingus, the literal child soldier who has one of the less pivotal roles in the story, as his plot begins and ends within the first few moments of your meeting. When you meet, he is a guardsman who was out of town when the curse hit, and is apparently the love interest of Susanne's Princess Sarah.
Where have I heard that name before?
He chooses to leave to save the world rather than stay by his perfectly capable princess's side because that's the more important role of the two. This is as much growth as he gets over the course of your entire journey. He makes no friends, reveals little about himself, and, spoilers, returns to date the princess at the story's conclusion. He gets us into the Cursed Castle in a meeting with the king. Speaking of the Cursed Castle, now feels as good a time as any to talk about the zoom mechanic.
Yes, you heard me correctly. The zoom mechanic.
A decent amount of Final Fantasy entries have some take on the gamification of finding hidden items across the world map, and in very rare cases is it actually fun. I'm looking at you, Chocobo Hancold. I would argue that they serve a similar purpose to the false walls and invisible hallways, in an attempt to keep the player engaged and active within the world, as they should remain on each map for a suitable amount of time. This allows them to find all items, fight all of the entries in the bestiary, level, and to really take in the work done to create a whole new world for the player. Unfortunately, in both cases, it can become quite dry and forgettable. So much so, I neglected to do it in several of the dungeons where the way forward is locked behind something so minuscule your real-world eyes cannot perceive it, and honestly, neither did my spirit guides.
AKA my absolutely amazing Twitch chatters over at twitch.tv/unlucky_Clover. They light my way forward when I would otherwise be very unfortunately lost. Hop over and give us a follow if you haven't already. That way you'll have a little bit more context as to who's sitting in the driver's seat.
I do think there's a direct correlation between the inclusion of little guys, i.e. adorable small critters or funny one-off side companions, and the enjoyment of these mechanics. Unfortunately, the Z key on my keyboard, while pretty cute, doesn't make the cut, and we end up with a bland reason to do more than a once-over on every location's map. At least they commit to both the zoom mechanic and the false walls, understanding that sparse and limited interactions with the world would make this feel more like a series of fake-outs, rather than something to keep your eye open for. The king tells us his daughter also went missing before the curse laid claim to the rest of the denizens of the kingdom, but that she's also the proud owner of a mithril ring. Heading to the sealed cave on the king's suggestion, you'll find Sarah.
I mean, you can basically see the princess from the castle gates as soon as you leave. If I threw a rock, I wouldn't just skim her, I'd hit her head on. I could probably call her name and she'd come running. The sealed cave is literally directly next to the castle. So far we have been bopping from landmark to landmark around the map, with literally no time to explore the world, to get random encounters. God forbid I want to level before my next dungeon. Oh, Shiva. I'm really giving off Goldilocks vibes, aren't I? I mean, last game, I was complaining that the characters were running so much I was starting to sweat, and here I am, tripping over the short road to the next nearest landmark. I mean, most of the games get the pacing correct. 1 was really good. 2 and 3 are just testing some limits. Mine, apparently. God, I feel like I'm really gonna regret saying that when live reacting to other games in the future, but that's stupid future me's problem.
For now, let's talk about the cutest way to include rotational party members, in this internet jester's humble opinion. Sarah offers to join you, which means she will now walk behind you on the world map, as well as in dungeons and towns. You can even speak to her for some unique dialogue lines as you continue through the story. In the Freelancers version, these rotational party members are also given their own pool of abilities that they can use at random to help the player when their party is in encounters. Sometimes meaningless, sometimes battle-defining, these pop-ups serve as a reminder that your preteen heroes are not alone, thanks to a handful of allies who don't overstay their welcome. It also helps to lend a hand to that hope is the answer, happy-go-lucky feeling of this life-or-death adventure that we're on, and makes the later interactions with these characters all the sweeter. With the aid of the princess that Ingus definitely doesn't have a crush on, we arrive at the end of the sealed cave to confront the djinn using the power of Sarah's mithril ring. Psych! He's been enhanced with the power of darkness, so he no longer has the same weaknesses. You'd assume maybe this reverses their weaknesses? Perhaps we need to go get a different item, or use a specific spell within the fight? But apparently Darkness's real power is just an additional health bar, as one short fight from now Sarah tries the same shit, and it works just fine. What this fight does demonstrate for its players is the speed at which bosses do damage, getting 2 actions for every round of player actions. But don't despair, this only bites you in the ass a couple of times when a back-to-back crit downs a few too many of your party members. Anyway, all this leads to the kids getting sucked out of the current room by, can you believe it, a talking crystal, where it congratulates Lunith on the great draft picks and confirmed they are the last thing standing before the world's destruction. And just like the first game, our goal is set. Find and use all 4 elemental crystals to save the world. But don't get too caught up in that, because we're going to use the fire crystal as a bookmark to move on to some of the other things we have to talk about, like the job system.
And moogles.
But more importantly, the job system.
Yeah, sure.
What many consider the truest innovation and longest-running improvement of the series thus far is the introduction of this job system, and its 22 unique jobs. After receiving the power of each crystal, you're also given access to a set of entirely new jobs, most of which use different pools of magic, weapons, and armor, and offer a fun new aesthetic for your characters. There is an old man in each inn globally who will tell you the surface level details about what the job you have equipped entails for your party composition. You can swap jobs on your characters at any time, excluding within combat, for the low price of starting each job at level 1, unequipping all of your gear, and possibly besetting you with a gnarly debuff to your base character stats until you've fought enough battles to get the character acquainted with their new job. I do love the ability to juggle party composition. This encourages a wide range of play and also allows for interesting ways to get around plot-based problems. Now, this may be obvious to a more experienced player that a well-rounded party is usually composed of a healing or defensive magic user, a backline damage dealer, a frontline damage dealer, and a heavy armor user, also known as a healer, ranged and melee DPS, and a tank. But you can really build your party in any way that you'd like. You can rely on specific timing or interesting interplay to get through some of the game's harder fights and mechanics. So instead of the jack-of-all-trades buildability of 2, all of our jobs are incredibly specialized, but still accessible to all characters. All this positivity was just a ramp up to a couple more Goldilocks gripes. I have 4 distinct issues with the 3D DS's version of the job system, that being limiting players' comfort when swapping jobs, the required specializations, the availability of information about the job system within the game, and gear. Some of these problems are addressed in the Pixel Remaster, but we'll get into that later. Let's dig in. Players are taught early on
By a moogle?
that you will both have to change your character's jobs and level each one, but they don't go into much detail regarding the adjustment phase. That gnarly debuff I mentioned earlier. This may make the player more hesitant to swap jobs when there's always the associated risk of getting a debuff at a particularly inopportune time, sometimes lasting longer than the need for the job persists. Speaking of need, specialized jobs are required for specific phases within the story, dungeons, and fights, and I do enjoy this mechanically. Impressing upon the player the importance of being provided with this many jobs spanning several interesting intersections is, you probably guessed it, conceptually really cool, but in practice leaves much to be desired. As the player continues throughout the story, these job swaps are hinted at by NPCs and background storytelling, in order to signal to the player that it may be win-defining in certain fights to swap one or all of their character's jobs to the one in question. We'll be looking at these instances more closely as they pop up in our silly little plot breakdown. But where my real issue with this gameplay lies is that the jobs themselves are given to the player and hinted at far too close to the dungeons that require them, meaning you're not given enough time to prepare without stopping to grind. And I do mean stopping. This isn't run around the first level of the next dungeon a couple of times so you can beat the boss, or taking the long way round to the next town, fighting every idiot that stops to break your stride. No, I mean the complete cessation of forward progression. The pain of swapping between jobs may make some players,
It's me. I'm players.
less likely to swap party members when feeling less than prepared, which quite ironically can result in an unprepared party when you suddenly need everyone to know magic, or a thief to open passing locked doors. Don't get me wrong. I do enjoy the ever-expansive job catalog that seemingly only gets longer the farther you progress into the plot. But being given access in some versions of the game to some of the most exceptionally powerful jobs right as you're turning the corner into Endgame does feel oppositional to degrading a character's ability to step into and out of said new jobs. In fact, some new players may very well ignore the Sage and Ninja granted to them in the second-to-last dungeon, in favor of a well-leveled Devout, or some other job that has a utility that they really like using in battle. Unfortunately, Sage and Ninja are far superior for the final fight, so much so that some guides warn not to even try it without having at least one of each on your team. In the Freelancers version, those classes are granted to you with the pickup of the last crystal's power, but nerfed overall to nullify the benefits of getting your hands on them earlier in the game. So, your build up to the endgame is ultimately hindered by several stages of mandatory grinding, all of which happen before major plot points, which can take a bit of wind out of your airship's sails.
Now, anyone about to start a comment regarding this aspect of the game or grinding in general with, well, I mean, it's a Final Fantasy game, or it's a JRPG, what did you expect? I hear you, I see you, and I appreciate your instinct to be highly combative.
Granted, I went into my replay of 3 expecting major bouts of grinding. What I didn't expect was the necessity of referencing several spreadsheets on how to best accrue stats for my characters in order to even have a hope of beating the final endgame bosses. Which brings us to my next point. The availability of information regarding the job system within the game. The developers were incredibly picky with what they chose to inform the players about. In fact, the job grind is rarely, if ever, brought up. So even players comfortable with the gameplay may not fully understand the ins and outs of the adjustment phase, or why it sometimes seems so much more punishing than others. Each class falls somewhere on this graph, between physical and magical damage types, as well as between chaotic and lawful alignments. Do a little convoluted math, and bam! You too can know exactly how many battles are required to grant your character full utility again. Although the cap for battles needed for the adjustment phase is 10, if you neglect to swap your character's job before a tough new area, it may take you a bit of a warm-up period to get them all up to snuff. Between that and the differences that some jobs provide to statistical upgrades, it can make the leveling up process in all versions of the game, excluding the Pixel Remaster, feel like a job in and of itself. Although, at no point does it feel as all-consuming as it does in 2. We've already brought up the old men who stand in inns. They don't exactly tell you all that much, but adding to their listing off of each character's jobs and special abilities, which already takes longer than it should, which stats receive what increase depending on a breakdown of XP, JP, and character level, would be very dry and difficult to sit through. But it's information that is just as boring to look up. And believe you me, only the most intuitive of thinkers is going to be able to appropriately swap their jobs at the appropriate intervals, utilizing only instinct and game design in order to get through this without prolonged grinding sessions. And look, if you are one of those people, or God forbid, one of the people who is willing to go through multiple extensive playthroughs so that you can analyze all of the data you've collected to reach the bottom of the programmer's mysteries, I salute you. No, really, we need more intelligent people like you within the fanbase so that you guys can create Excel sheets that the rest of us can reference when we're trying to appropriately kit out our characters. In fact, if you ever need someone to edit like a graphic for a spreadsheet or something, hit me up, I'll do it for free. You're doing the Lord's work. And last but not least, you need a crazy number of gear sets to make transitioning from one path to the next clear-cut and clean. It isn't as simple as relying on monster drops or buying the best gear in each sequential town. No. It's figuring out the best light, medium, and heavy armor options in 4 sets with accompanying weapons. Fortunately, it does give you quite the pile of get-out-of-jail-free, self-reveal-at-any-time items when you do finally come across something better for your character's precise job. Or hold on to everything, so when it comes time for that achievement hunt, you'll be ready for simply one of the goofiest exercises in wasting your own time you could ask for. Job gear can be very specific, with certain weapons only useful for one job, and each town specializes, so there are very few places where a party of 4 separate jobs could be kit at once. Because all the jobs require special gear, your character is stripped of gear upon changing class, so job swaps are always a 2-step process. One last addition to this point is spells. This is one of the installments in which almost all non-plot mandatory spells are only available for purchase, with the exception of some summons and loot drops. But the reason this does not prod at me in the way that one's for-sale-only magic system did is the fact that you can remove, relearn, and completely re-equip spellbooks onto other party members at any time with no negatives to be found. So while you may need to go out of your way to purchase more than one copy of a spell for a party composition with more than one magic user, you can also swap spellbooks at any time. Meaning if you need someone else to level a mage, you can go ahead and swap that book. Or, God forbid, you need to res your healer. These points are all nitpicks. I do think this game handles this system relatively well. But with the time commitment and excruciating grinds in certain areas of this game, I do think these nitpicks are to be expected. It's almost like if you give the player this much time to examine your concepts, you're kind of asking for this kind of critique, if you ask me. On a much happier note, we finally get our first Moogle appearance of the series, and honestly, they appear close to perfection. Bat wings, round belly, and papand are my favorite flavor of Moogle personally, and like Fat Chocobo, who also appears in this iteration, hold a special place in my heart. Their strange infatuation with long-distance communication and their insane addiction to Koopo nuts have made them a fan-favorite critter. Honestly, there isn't much else to be said about these small winged mammalians. I could get into the Cryon, an entirely different cold climate-based race intended for Final Fantasy II that was scrapped and wholesale changed into the Moogle design, but that's boring. Instead, Let's just look at these majestic beasts for a moment. Excellent. Okay, so where to next with our new jobs and our mission from something greater and all-knowing? Well, returning to His Highness in Susane.
I'm not fully sure what Ur's relationship is to the monarchical setting of this particular corner of the world, or realistically any of the political goings-on anywhere. So, maybe we're not meant to care.
He will bestow upon you his night dingus and a canoe. And while I'm a little upset that it wasn't wizard-bound this time, we don't quite need the canoe as much in Final Fantasy III, so I'm not that mad about it. Sarah rushes out to wish us safe travels. How cute. Next, we return to Kazus to the awful news that we're losing one of our party members. No. No. Not again. You cannot do this to me again. Refia was my tank. She still has her gear, for God's sakes. You can't just replace her with a rando. To save myself and the viewer from that plot-based spiral, let's talk about Mognet. Remember how I said moogles are obsessed with long-distance communication? Well, before there was the link pearl, there was the Mognet, a post office-like service in which a moogle is posted in each town you find yourself in. As the plot continues and you meet more NPCs, they can send you letters. Now, you're supposed to intuit this next part, but I didn't, because unless things are spelt out for me, I will forget.
I guess sounded out is more accurate, because if you did try to spell something at me, I'm pretty sure I would just fall over dead.
Certain NPCs will only send letters to the party if approached with the right character at the front of the party. For Topapa, it doesn't matter. For Sarah, it's Dingus. For other characters you haven't met yet, other main characters need to be in front. I usually get one without thinking about it because I automatically put Ark in front because he's my favorite of the preordained saviors of the universe. Granted, that in and of itself should have been the only clue that I needed, but upon looking for additional information as to why or how I did not meet all of the prerequisites to get into the secret Endgame dungeon, I found out this whole structure was frontman dependent. It originally had the ability to send messages to other players as well, but unless you're playing the DS version on a DS, believe me, I tried, but she just won't wake up. This section acts as a twofold point. One, I will use any excuse to talk to moogles, and two, I'm not the brightest bulb, so continue to take my words with a heavy serving of salt. As with most of the towns in the opening area, Kazoo has a small attached dungeon with some helpful upgrades that your party is now well equipped to handle. These are usually pretty short, sweet, and similar, but I like this more than passerbys giving you all of their physical belongings because you showed them an ounce of kindness that makes them believe you're capable of saving the world, or the squint really hard at random spots on the ground until they sparkle ways of kitting out your characters. Plus, on an exciting note, the game has interactable wells. This time in an actual gameplay type way, not just some cute line about set dressing. My second favorite type of interactable well, and therefore already better than two, scientifically. After losing Refia, we pick up Sid, who states we can have ownership of his airship in exchange for a ride home to his wife. We find the ship parked on sand, so point for Final Fantasy III's Sid, but it cannot gain enough air to get over the rock blocking his way home, so we'll just take that point away real quick. I don't think anyone here is legally old enough to drive, but what's the worst that could happen? Ah, they total it. Granted, that was the expected route, through the rock. So you'd assume that if Sid offered the airship as a reward, he too thought there was a better chance that it would survive being smashed hull first into solid stone. I mean, that's why he asks Taka and Refia to commission a mithril ram so that it could break through the rock. Or maybe he just wanted to give the put-upon girl an excuse to take a year abroad before taking over the family business. Yes, we do get her back. Yes, it was contrived. No, I will not be speaking on it further. After learning that Refia and Ingus are also orphans of unknown origin and totaling the ship, they complete the now very short walk to Sid's home, who informs them that he can make a new ship in Kana, but if they want it to fly, they'll have to talk to King Argus in a desert kingdom to the west. But first explore Kana, which apparently, much like Virginia, is for lovers, as we find a bedridden, heartbroken woman named Selena weeping over her boyfriend, some loser named Dash, who has apparently disappeared. Speaking on bedridden women, Mrs. Sid, who is only referred to by this moniker, needs to be healed of her cough using an elixir, which is a pretty steep price for a woman you don't know. Sid responds by saying something weird and then offering us all of his belongings. Wander to the closest landmark to our current location, Dragon's Peak, where this girl boss picks us up on her way home from work so her hatchlings can chow down on a tasty dinner. It's within this nest that we meet Desh, the amnesiac, who after some slight ribbing tells us the one thing he does know. If we try to fight this dragon, we will die. So in a scripted escape, after warnings you can choose to ignore, you jump down the mountain and reconvene with your newest buddy, who grants you a mini spell scroll. For the spell mini, not just like a smaller than average scroll. And he states he'd like to join your party, because he's lonely and just needs some people to chill with. Refia, always the girl's girl, rips him a new one for not immediately returning to his girlfriend, which he ignores in order to follow his destiny or whatever. Left stranded on one side of a mountain range, a random gnome tells you the trick to get into his motherland, so casting Mini on your party affords you entrance to Tosis, where the most important thing going on at the moment is Dr. Shelko's recent food poisoning, which must be cured with an antidote to progress the plot. He gives you everything he owns, and sets you on your way through a teeny tiny dungeon. Talking to Desh once small will reveal that melee characters will do garbage damage, and you should all be magic users. Sleeping in Tosis will charge your spell slots, and you can be on your way. At this point in the game, we don't feel the push and pull of the job system as much as we will shortly. But some would argue that getting the information about Minnie upon receiving the spell, or from gnomes within the village, would make it easier to prepare for the dungeon. Again, I'm not asking for a huge neon sign that reads "Mages Only" above the dungeon door, but maybe Dr. Shelko could mention how unhelpful the town's other mages have been, or a gnome could bring up the fact that they haven't reclaimed the tunnels underneath the town because gnomes don't have a proclivity for magic, unlike fairies, instead of just being weirdly horny. Crawling forth from the mud and re-larging yourselves lands you smack dab in the middle of the Viking outposts.
And before you ask, as a fan of pirates, yes, I am offended that they've been replaced with Vikings. And just because they all sail on ships and plunder and pillage does not make them the same thing. Go on, leave your divisive comment about how culturally dissimilar but essentially the same they are, because they're not. All I know is that if you had a story about pirates and a story about Vikings, they would be tonally different regardless of how many similar plot points they had. I mean, like, outside of just aesthetics, think about it as like fighting for something to live for versus fighting for something to die for. This could be an essay all on its own, so I'm gonna leave it at that.
Apparently, the surprise earthquake, again, the fact that a floating continent has any concept of this kind of disaster is startling, woke the sea's guardian dragon, who proceeded to destroy all of their ships, with the exception of the Enterprise.
And also, one last point, if they were the same, then why didn't they just make Vikings a pirate job and have them be interchangeable? It's because of the moveset. Are you telling me that a pirate is gonna have a taunt mechanic? I mean, some of them might, but in this game, Vikings do, so checkmate.
Which is promised to us if we can find a way to calm the beast. This is yet another early boss that you cannot fight. Do not even try. Do not even try to get into that boat, unless you want to fight for your life to make it back to shore. You know what? Don't even look at the boat. Instead, creep around the inlet and to the Nepto Temple, where we find a statue of the big boss man in question and see it's missing an eye, allowing us to crawl into its socket as wee little guys. Again, at this point, you'll want to go back to town with the realization you can swap jobs and regain those spell slots before entering. Now we know the shtick and are aptly prepared this time around. Unless, of course, you forget that swapping jobs does not refill your spell slots, in which case you could end up in the dungeon with no magic and have to fix that, which I, as a professional, did not do on several separate occasions. The dungeon leads to a giant rat clinging to its new shiny possession. Thinking about it, we aren't fighting a giant rat, we're just small. So we now have to beat the shit out of a completely normal-sized rat. Whatever, besides the point. With the eye returned to its proper place, the dragon regains consciousness and is now back to peacefully watching over the waters. We come away from this one boat richer and with a different meaning, for the eyes being the windows to the soul. Before we go any further, I do think I should drop an additional tangent right here, as we are about to enter one of the less structured areas of Final Fantasy III. This is the first time your party of heroes is let loose, for lack of a better phrase. While some of the previous games in the series have had inconsequential towns with silly little side quests explicitly for achievement hunters, every time the map opens up in this installment, the player is allowed to choose their own string of events. Some places are more important to go earlier on, others will get you better gear to help you down the line, but there is no true order of operations. I think this helps to avoid that on-rails feeling that games like 1 and other adventure RPGs can suffer from. While this may offer a patina of confusion to a casual gamer, I do think it also emphasizes how important talking to NPCs and exploration will continue to be as we journey through this franchise. Our next step is to go to Takul, a horribly sacked town where speaking to the leader will inform you that they've taken all of the town's men and would love it if you could help get them back, before offering you everything he owns. We're led to believe this is the work of Argus's men. The same Argus who's supposed to make airship work. Hey, wouldn't be the first time someone capable of making war machines of unimaginable proportion swapped sides, now would it? If you choose to stop in the fairy village, hubba hubba, they will inform you that a wizard's curse has taken root within the magic tree of the forest, and if it is not returned, all of the woods will die. A trip to Castle Argus sees it completely abandoned. Then head to Golgan Gulch, where a bunch of blind, future-seeing bald men give you the Toad spell and tell you to go to the Tower of Owen to fulfill your destiny. We also see the second appearance of the Chocobo Forest, just as marvelous as any other, but less necessary in Final Fantasy III. Which should have been subtitled, How Many Boats is Simply Too Many. And like I pointed out earlier, these steps can be completed in pretty much any order. To get into the Tower of Owen, you gotta go frog, and Refia, ever the amphibian hater, is wildly against this. But unlike the minified dungeons, this is merely the price of entry, rather than the cost of completion. Here was one of those moments where my stupid human eyes failed me, and I forgot about the ever-so-important zoom mechanic. Once at the top, the menacing Medusa, who's been taunting us via loudspeaker up until now, name-drops the supposed main villain, Zand, who she claims to be helping to plunge the world into darkness by defeating us here and now. After beating her, Desh jumps into the fire, quite literally, revealing not only that he's an ancient born of a race of ancient peoples with an advanced technological background, but also an engineer and great watcher meant to fix this mess. Teleporting the party back onto the Enterprise where they can't stop his noble sacrifice, or more accurately, get in the way, we see that the maelstrom previously blocking the way to the wider ocean has dissipated. Left rudderless, with one more villain of unknown proportion on the radar, you can head to the Village of the Ancients, where we find out the party is part of a great cycle of warriors set forth to balance light and darkness, or else be overcome by the void and end of all things. Also, this little boy tells you to ride a chocobo in exchange for a prize. Say less. Lolly-ho to the dwarves, who give us our next major plot point. Recently, their frost horn has gone missing, stolen by Gutsko the rogue. As they all need to stand watch to guard the other one, they request that our heroes follow him down to retrieve the horn. We follow him to the subterranean lake and beat him handily before returning to replace the horn to its proper place. But, uh-oh, that looming shadow is secretly Gutsko the whole time, and like an honorary fourth party member of evil, he pops up to steal the other horn and reveals his grand scheme. To open up the molten cave, steal the power of the fire crystal, and you immediately fight him again as this figment-looking ass abomination, and retrieve the dwarves' lost treasures yet again, for which they give you all of their possessions. Oh yeah, and the Crystal of Fire gives you a new set of jobs. I literally just lost the debuff. We're sitting on Ranger for a minute, okay? We learn from a messenger who has run himself to death to find us on this island. Go off, Triathlon King. That Takul is apparently in even greater trouble, which probably has nothing to do with you taking all of their weapons and then getting waylaid by the trouble of dwarves. Head back to get kidnapped and dropped off in a tree cell. While you may want to listen to this little dweeb's advice and get one of your party out to be a scholar, as the upcoming fight is one of the rare ones in which scholar does feel like more than just a quick Google search or a provider of flavor text. Then again, you can still bulldoze most of the mechanics with enough attention paid to the fight, and a couple of very difficult DPS exchanges. While you can still beat this fight with pretty much any other party comp, the inclusion of a less than optimized job in exchange for a shorter fight is a really intelligent and great use of this job system. But prior to getting small, take some time to meet the aforementioned King Argus, King of the Desert. More like a deserted castle, am I right? Anyway, the king's advisor apparently cursed his soldiers to follow his own bidding after becoming sickened by the darkness that overtook them. I will posit that the monarchs of Final Fantasy are some of the most hapless NPCs, and I do think this is done thematically on purpose. We'll get more into this the further into the series we go. Hein, a man with a bone to pick, waxes on about the power of darkness before trying to kill some kids. And again, while some fights are heavily reliant on their gimmicks and mechanics, some can be trialed and errored through. I think this is a great aspect of the game design here, one we've seen through the necessity of changing jobs or adding characters to facilitate dungeon design. This is done relatively consistently across all of the titles in the series, but I do think this is an exceptional example. As it turns out, we were inside the Elder Tree, the one the fairies were missing this whole time. We return it and are gifted the Fang of Wind.
I genuinely question these creatures' intention in not giving us, the Warriors of Light, the key to successfully saving the universe. But then again, I guess checking the credentials of a group of children does make sense.
Now we can finally head back to Argus, who thanks us for saving him and gives us everything he owns, including the Wheel of Time, aka a perpetual engine created by the masterful race of ancients that, when returned to Sid, will get us a new airship. One powerful enough to get us to the secret bigger, better continent. And the man who can only build the exterior of the ship skips this step entirely by transforming your water ship into an airship. One that can only park in water, but it is what it is. Still can't jump a mountain, but that is also what it is. Sid reveals that 10 years ago, after a fateful airship crash, the old man and 4 children he ferried made it safely to the floating continent. The rest of the ship's inhabitants apparently assumed dead? We also learn that it wasn't merely 10 years ago all of this happened, as the crash took place at the same time as a time freeze took hold of their original home, leaving them floating for the better part of 1,000 years. It was the power of darkness that froze time, and we must find out why. Flying from our home right into a cloud of darkness. Foreshadowing? Or just shadowing?
Who's to say?
Arriving at this marble-looking-ass frozen land where there are only 3 places you can go. I guess this game will be over soon. Psych! Head over to the wrecked ship to meet Priestess Arya and her nameless caretaker. She had tried to stop the darkness that stopped time with the rest of the Water Temple priestesses, but received major damage before the time stopped. 1,000 years ago. Meaning her caretaker isn't worth anything, as something as simple as a high potion fixes her right up. This version of events makes slightly less sense than the original story, where the water crystal is subsumed by the ground and the priestesses stop time to avoid the flood killing everyone, I think. Anyway, she begs you to take her to the Temple of Water to retrieve the shard of crystal, created to unlock the power of the water crystal, which is being held in the Cave of Tides, connecting all 3 available locations. She opens the door with prayer and then steps in front of a mind blast that kills her? Who's the perpetrator? Yet another messed up looking kraken. Although this one is harder to explain than the last few, and their quite phallic appearance. Kick his ass, and Arya simply passes away. Another earthquake? Nah, just time waking back up, in which all of our heroes lose consciousness. Uni, a mysterious old woman, appears in our dreams and tells us to find Doga in Dal. And then we awaken Amur, the City of Water, having been asleep for 3 whole days. Well, everyone but EP Boy Lunith has been up and about talking to people to get us all this helpful info. We also learn nobody remembers the time stop. And you can do this. We find our latest ship held hostage by the town's antagonist, Goldork, who made an improbably deep pit of water so that people couldn't deliver his mail? Damn. Maybe he's just lonely. It's very much giving King Midas in his depressive self-isolation period. This may be a problem a hug could solve. Anyway, you're told the sewer witch Delilah has Levygrass shoes that will get you across the mega moat blocking our progress, where we are introduced to and promptly save the Fellows, aka the real warriors of light destined to save the world. Cross this dirty puddle and hug that golden man to death. Before you smother him, he reveals he has a crystal, but he's gonna destroy it. Oh no, you must be thinking, what do? Do we need to find some workaround, birth a new crystal, discover a new life-changing brand of magic? No, it was a fake. You didn't see the little tag that read Made in Gissel at the bottom? Gullible. Okay, map opens up. Field trip. Head to Duster, where the bards of the town rhyme at you and convince you that there is no reason you'd ever want one of these nerds on your team. Then head to the summoner town of Verpleto and grab some summons, making one up until now unusable class actually fun to swap into. Flying over the map's most identifiable nation will landlock you behind a series of dungeons and quests that see you through a silly civil war of sorts, the formation of two boys' lifelong friendships after a bit of thematic symmetry, a heroic sacrifice, yet another corrupt advisor to royalty turning into a bird, and a bit of game-prescribed grinding. Here's the first of two examples of when and where the job change mechanic forces you to stop playing. And it is a rough place to grind. But we do meet Fat Chocobo here, so sin's forgiven. The Dragonspire mini-dungeon is about as good as any spot to goon for an hour or two.
You heard what I said. And if you're young enough to understand why that's funny, welcome. This is now targeted marketing. We don't have a lot of your demographic in the viewership, so if you could tell your friends, I'd appreciate that.
After defeating a fight that is particularly simple if you play it how the game wants you to, Prince Aelys gives us everything he owns, which apparently includes a new airship to apologize for the one his peoples destroyed. The nauseously fast boat can now pass the wind tunnel, blocking the path forward to Doga's manor. Doga, we come to learn, is the keeper of our plot. See the bookshelf in Final Fantasy II? Very similar characters, in that they say a lot of things. In this case, Doga reveals he is one of 3 students of the great wizard Noah.
I will not be talking about the Noah Ark symbology and the biblical metaphor. Yet.
Along with Uni and Zand, each was bestowed a gift when Noah died, and it shockingly isn't Doga's sick-ass Moogle force. He got that of his own accord. No. He was granted the domain of magic, Uni that of dreams, and Zand was gifted mortality.
And you know what? Speaking from the mortal perspective, that probably would have made me go a little feral too. I mean, I'm not one of those your legacy is the weight of a life well lived or beauty is only beautiful because it's fleeting philosophy enjoyers. I mean, like, I don't love slugs because they die. I think they're cute. And I would be absolutely fine if these squishy little slime guys were immortal gods.
So Zand understandably sought to undo his position, and less understandably ended up calling forth darkness in an effort to stop time. The thing is, wink wink nudge nudge, Zand was frozen too. So he could not have started the earthquake that got all of these things into motion. Am I smelling a secret or bigger, badder boss? Yet another hallway of collectible bestiary entries and exposition leads you to the writer's favorite plot device. An airship upgrade. Doga grants your ship the ability to explore across sea as well as air. All that's blue is accessible to you, baby. So go on, explore the wide open expanse. Just make sure you find Doga's hidden city of mages, the trove of great and powerful treasures down below, and go beat the shit out of Odin for me while you're at it. Now back to business. Following Doga's instructions that you can hear just ever too quietly playing in the back of your head, head to the Temple of Time to grab Noah's loot to allow you access to the Land of Dreams and awaken Uni. She joins your party, gives you the Fang of Fire, and points you in the direction of your next airship. Plot beat in the ancient ruins, where a miraculously still alive group of trapped researchers and scholars point you towards the end of the dungeon and the Invincible. A newer, cooler airship. It's got beds. It's got shops. It's got Mognet and a Fat Chocobo corner. Everything you could ask for, except the ability to fly over large rocks. Welcome to your new life of jumping slightly smaller mountains. This allows you access to the final areas of the game, and I hope you're ready, because we are going to run through this as quickly as I wish it played. First on to Flogabard, Town of the Dark Knights, with its very own mini-dungeon. Then face the Cave of Shadows, an interesting dungeon where your party is supposed to assume Dark Knight form and use their special ability to fight this area's flavor of the day, splitting enemies. Quickly, and I do promise tangents and all, this is a faster pace than what is experienced at the end of the game. This is the last of the presupposed job swaps hoisted upon the player. So how was it handled overall? On my first playthrough, I was caught completely unawares, and with the bold audacity of a much less experienced player, I bulldozed ahead, forcing my well-leveled team against difficult fights and slow and steady dungeon crawls. On a second playthrough, I came prepared. I was ready to read hints and level the jobs that I needed when I needed them. This made a lot of the fights significantly easier and made the job system overall more enjoyable to interact with. I think the previous examples of the forced job swap are incredibly well choreographed. Multiple people in the towns tell you exactly what job you need and why, if you want to have any luck facing the final boss in that area. Up until Flogabard, we've just recently unlocked the job Dark Knight, and the only place that sells arms and armor for this job is in Flogabard proper, which you unlock behind a jumpable mountain, so we've only just received access to that town. We're supposed to assume, through context clues, of having to Dark Knight all over the small hometown cave, and all of these sad, distressed Dark Knights within the Cave of Shadows, that we need to adopt a full team of Dark Knights to beat splitting enemies. So, similarly to needing to goon all over Saronia, you need to gobble some mobs for an hour or two. Fortunately, the world map is open to you this time. Just make sure you actually grab arms and armor for your heroes before leaving Flogabard. I think it makes up for the fact that fewer people tell you to expect the change, with the easier accessibility to dungeons and the ability to leave to go to better grind zones, as well as the invincible nearby for easy item purchase and full rest potential. By the time I hit my third playthrough, I remembered exactly what areas were impacted by this mechanic, so I only leveled up what I needed and when. Therefore, I barely felt the impact on the story or my time. I think the job system is very well done and pretty well implemented. Perfect? No. Frustrating? Sometimes. But I will take those flaws for the joys of a system that works. Prior to starting your final sprint towards the end, hopefully you've remembered you have some business back home. Here you can grab the summons for Leviathan and Bahamut after some fun fights, and grab the Onion Knight class by helping some of the kiddos from your hometown. Then head back to your life or death journey in which Doga and Uni announce they have to sacrifice themselves, a la Minwu. Rest in peace, great Final Fantasy mages. It seems your sole goal in life is to hand out ships and then die to give the younger generation a chance to save themselves. This creates keys for the circus, Crystal Tower, and Eureka, a mysterious subterranean zone that holds great and dangerous weapons of old. They do trap a bunch of kids in a fight to the death, but then again, we have killed and saved the souls of a lot of great and mystical creatures for future use, so maybe there's something to it. Something more than traumatizing a handful of youths anyway. Sad, but with a cause, our four child heroes quest on to the final brutal zones of the game. The Maze of Ancients, a moat and gate system that blocks the party's access to their ship with its infinite Moogle-run economy, also grants a brief reprieve and the ability to save before starting the real grueling trot to the end of the game. Find the door to Eureka, facing some mildly difficult random encounters, and some dreadfully intense fights,
depending on level and job choice,
but netting you several very helpful items for what is to come. Head back to the Crystal Tower and real test of skill, the World of Darkness. A brief fight with Xand proves he's really no more than a puppet, but a scripted death to the revealed Cloud of Darkness after being dragged into a mirror unearthed true horror. A world eater with some pretty big baggage, if you know what I'm talking about. The spirits of Doga and Uni work together to gather a team who will bring you back to life to try that shit again. In order to weaken the Cloud of Darkness to the point where it can be defeated, our young heroes must fight 4 bosses, each the keeper of a nega crystal inhabited by the souls of the warriors of darkness who fought this battle in a time before our own. With their 4 powers combined and that of our party, we blow this cloud off into the yawning void looking to encompass the world, and rejoice in our newfound peace, seeing all of our compatriots off to their very own happy endings. Okay, now to unpack and reorganize all of the important bits on this miles-long list of places to go and people to see. Unlike the other stories told in the series so far, Final Fantasy III is a little less linear, meaning there are far fewer missable items or locations. I say that neither is a good thing nor a bad thing, kind of just a place to start, as I really did struggle to figure out how to break this game down. Let's talk about crystals. Positioned in the very first scene as the key to opposing the greatest threat facing the world, offering you your mission statement, as well as providing you access to the job system, crystals are back as a driving force in Final Fantasy III. Until you meet Doga and Uni, the only information we receive about the plot is provided to us through the intervention of the crystals. While they didn't make an appearance in the second game, one sets crystals up as icons whose saving grants the party power. It keeps the player on track and can even grant you an idea of exactly how far you've progressed through the game. You may have expected me to utilize the crystals as markers of progression the same way we did in 1. The issue with utilizing that method here is that the plot points surrounding the crystals are far more awkwardly spread out in Final Fantasy III. Dungeons are far more likely to lead to plot points or gear upgrades than they are to another crystal-related MacGuffin, In fact, the items that you need to get into new areas usually have far more to do with revealing a hidden truth than they do with excavating a future crystal dungeon. False crystals are revealed, and the plot, when it does crop up, usually ties itself to the current location or few surrounding locations, making crystals feel more like a job catalog upgrade than the key to avoiding a cataclysmic event. So, while we do see the return of crystals and their importance to the Warriors of Light, the plot does function far more similarly to the pacing of 2, which neglected any form of structure in favor of its breakneck plot and long-haul hikes, meaning we don't see the crystals acting as arbiters of exposition and progression in quite the same way that we did in 1. All this to say, crystals schmistals, the easiest way to track your progression through the story of 3 is with your ship upgrades. The party's acceptance of their potential and duty is punctuated by getting your first airship, before you've even opened up the world at large. You don't get another ship proper until you're ready to face the real dilemma, a frozen world reawakening. Once we've solved all the problems of this world's people, we get the Nautilus, to start on our path towards greater insight into the plot's true intentions. We see the next ship upgrade when we finish the first of Noah's disciples' quests, opening up the underwater possibilities of a continent with deep sea caves. And we get our final craft following Uni's questline, opening up the whole of the map and signaling the final act. This allows you to finally explore all of the unpassable mountainous areas and amp up for the last combat arena. Each boat punctuates the character's growth and understanding the way the crystals did in 1. Just a brief aside. I do love the first continent and its airship interplay. Although I could take or leave losing your first ship to a boulder being a major plot point, overall I do think that the flow of travel is well-paced and smooth. And while things like the outer ring on the first map do appear a bit empty, achievements like the Pixel Remaster's visit every location or the Ancient Child side quest to ride a chocobo around it do give it more use than some of the more aesthetically centered features on some Final Fantasy maps.
All that to say, I hate the second continent. It sucks. I mean, sure, the towns have unique, interesting aesthetics, the occasional side plot, and some late-game exposition, so I don't care nearly as much as I did about the empty expanses and plot-specific locations of 2, up until the end of the game, where the maze of mountainous regions and constant need to swap ships make you feel like you're being punished for reaching the end of the game without being fully prepared.
Regardless, I think this utilization of modes of transportation to lock plot, while also remaining location-specific, is incredibly well done, and the perfect culmination of the 2 systems we've previously seen. Not only that, but it does an amazing job of signaling to the player great changes in the plot or time for exploration. I guess we can follow that up with a staple of these videos. What were some of the major and minor differences between this version and the Pixel Remaster? Off the jump, a noticeable difference comes in the first scene, as we begin the story with a pre-formed party of Onion Knights, the job we saw revealed so close to the 3D version's conclusion, rather than a lone self-employed Lunith. The sprites in the Pixel Remaster, as well as the original releases, are all nameless copies, color-coded to differentiate, but the Freelancers release gave our characters faces as well as personalities. I think the stylization of this version is very cute, helping to exaggerate the childlike wonder of these kids and their journey. Some of the bosses and enemies remained pretty much unchanged, while others still received some in-game tweaks to their mechanics. With these changes, we also saw the introduction of the DS-centric Mognet, major overhaul on the job system, your guest party members receiving their own abilities, and the logo and music receiving major restyling. This does make the Pixel Remaster feel stripped back comparatively, as many of these plot and job changes were removed to stick closer to the original storyline developed in 1990. The demonstrably bad decision to change the music when transitioning to the DS was undone, and the even worse gameplay mechanic of demoting you when swapping jobs is nowhere to be found in the Pixel Remaster. We as always see better in-game movement and the addition of a sprint option, boosts for faster XP and gil gain, as well as the option to stop random encounters, more localizations were done, and we see the auto-battler's reappearance. In my opinion, these are all major benefits to the Pixel Remaster. Not only that, but the job system sees the inclusion of an auto-equip pop-up after every job swap, almost completely eliminating the chance of walking into a fight naked as well as debuffed. But the difficulty of navigation is simplified again to a major extent, not only showing you the contents of closed rooms on maps, but the location of any secret tunnel as soon as one had been uncovered. But easy isn't all bad, of course. My best friend the mini-map gets added with the remaster with a chest and item counter and easily readable town names. The lack of mini-map is felt, seen, and heard in the 3D version by the navigationally impaired, like myself. A personal failing, I know, and I bring it up more so as a warning to those that might watch the VODs to be prepared for a somewhat dizzying amount of turning around and getting lost. Anyway, let's talk about the changes made to the job system and which reworking I liked more. Both games see changes to the original Famicom release, the 3D version making the jobs more complex, and the Pixel remaster, shocking no one, peeled it back, creating some class amalgamations from the different iterations of the game.
That being the case, I must ask why it doesn't feel like any significant changes were actually made.
Whereas in the Freelancers versions, Vikings and Warriors feel a little too similar, removing the Warrior's ability to access a unique action makes it a subpar tank that you look forward to booting in the remaster. Mages feel a little bit more refined in the Pixel remaster as fewer classes get access to some magic pools. I think getting the Onion Knight earlier makes it reasonable that you may level them to an extent that it feels worthwhile, but not having access to the endgame Onion Knight gear like you do in the Freelancers version makes leveling them for their own sake feel a bit hollow. While both the Onion Knight and Freelancer provide safe leveling options, the Freelancer is important as it is a neutral swapping point for the other jobs in a debuff-built system. Not every job has a better variant in either game, but it is certainly easier to feel some of these upgrades depending on the version you're playing. Mage trees in the Pixel remaster feel more obvious and beneficial, again most likely due to stripping other jobs of their magic potential. Whereas the better martial jobs in the 3D version feel somewhat required, as the enemies hit harder than you can heal. Honestly, not a single version of this game gets the balance right, and we can see that quite obviously through the Pixel remaster's simplification and the DS's bloat and redundancy. But between these two versions, we are shown how spacious and versatile our new job system can be. The DS version of the game also has a uniquely grueling quality in its interesting and varied achievements list. It hosts the standard achievements attached to guild gain, long slogs through the story, and intense attention paid to which beasts you have and haven't bloodied. Honestly, missable chests and beasts in temporary dungeons are to be expected.
Granted, my baby ass is out here reliant on the Pixel Remaster's chest counter, and seemingly floundering when it's plucked from my grasp.
Of course, all of these are dwarfed by a much more serious achievement. Obtain all jobs, level each one, on each character, to 99. Granted, with the right grind you can get a level per encounter, if you're playing correctly. So if you manage not to make any mistakes, fighting meticulously, and paying incredible attention to every action spent, you're still looking to gain 8,000 levels to platinum the game. So if you think that's going to take you less time than doing another complete full run through the game, prepare to have your delusion dashed. I do prefer the complex and dragging plot of the DS version, especially when directly compared to the smooth and buttery workings of the Pixel remaster. Then again, I am a sucker for a good character arc. Speaking of, as much as I enjoyed the conclusion of the story for all of our kiddos, I'm not sure I loved all of their characterization, or the importance placed on specific ideas that our heroic players were meant to personify. Let's take a look at them, their dark counterparts, and darkness itself in the first story that isn't a cut and dry good versus evil plotline. Let's take this to the character corner. Welcome to the character corner, aka my less than subtle way of temporarily changing my background. Alright, so let's start this character breakdown the same way the game introduces them to us. Starting with Luneth, aka the Warrior of Courage. At first I didn't see any problem with this designation, as Luneth is the one who goes into the Altair Caves by himself. He's the first one that hears the call of the crystal and shows no hesitation as he starts his road towards saving the world. But his laissez-faire attitude throughout seems antithetical towards that designation, seeing as one of the core tenets of courage is facing one's fears. I would argue that Ark, who is obviously very fearful but overcomes it of his own accord, and shows more courage than his adopted brother.
Ark is labeled the warrior of kindness, which I personally think is a better fit for Lunith. You know, the gatherer of allies, the leader of our party, the one to comfort Arya as she took her final breath, the one with a small, veritable army of old men writing him about their glory days via the Magnet. Whereas the often bullied Ark seemingly waits until halfway through the game to make a single friend, and that's through a shared experience. It seems as though we're narrowing down kindness to only include the people that we already think deserve it, whereas Lunith jumps on the first opportunity to serve both friend and stranger alike. I really think our boys would do well with a little flip. Now onto my biggest gripe. Refia.
I didn't have an issue with her warrior title at first either, that of affection. She does have a soft spot for people missing their love interests, lacking the jealousy often inflicted upon single female characters.
And instead choosing to support those that she finds lonely or heartbroken as they continue their journey. But what really starts to fray at this description for me is the insistence that she is only going to return to her father's shop because she feels guilty? That doesn't necessarily feel like the human embodiment of affection, if you ask me.
She could have learned a profound love for the craft on their journey, or realized her life under her adopted father's roof is fulfilling enough.
As a previously self-identified, highly affectionate tomboy with emotional regulation issues and an inability to not say everything I'm thinking, I do find an incredible amount of kinship with Refia. So that isn't to say that affectionate would be the apotheosis of her character. I just wish if they intended for her to be the affectionate one, her character was a little bit more like the character that we see shown off in the FMV. Don't worry, we are getting to that. It's literally like my next point. What I do think we have here is another case of swapped identity. In fact, Ingus has been shown to be incredibly affectionate. Yes, he does show off his role as the warrior of determination as he leaves the Castle Sasune and his love interest behind. But the entirety of his story is wrapped around that love, getting back to the one person he cares most about in the entirety of the world. Yes, maybe there was a little bit of backlash against labeling a male character something like the warrior of affection. That is neither here nor there for me.
But you could just as easily get away with the use of devoted or dutiful, even chivalric, to describe his ability to trust his compatriots. Implicitly, to set his mind to saving the world without further explanation, and to remain bonded to his princess. Refia is a character so much more reliant on her hard-headed nature as opposed to Angus's intuitive trust of where his heart leads. He wants to save the world because he cares about it, not because he believes he must against all odds.
But let's get into some thematic analysis. I really want to dig into the meat of what darkness means in the context of the game overall. We've seen darkness inherently tied to concepts like ego, power, selfishness, which seem incredibly oppositional to the very altruistic titles bestowed to our warriors of light. So we could posit that those are the different sides of the same coin. Selfish, selfless, dark, light. Evil? Good, not really. That's where we sort of get into a split here from other adventure RPGs. These are not inherently aligned with moralistic sides of a single spectrum. Rather, we see the very good and beneficial aspects of the Warriors of Darkness in the same way that we can imagine that the aspects of light that we see within the game could be preyed upon to be turned into something much more vile. People are incredibly multifaceted, and I think Final Fantasy III does a really good job of tying all of these disparate lines of thought together to show the benefits of both sides of that coin. It is not automatically villainous to do something selfish. In fact, if you want to treat others the way that you would like to be treated, you do have to save some of that kindness for yourself. The theme of the flexibility of morality is incredibly pivotal to Final Fantasy overall. So for funsies, I want to look at these four and posit dark titles for them if the cycle had been slightly different, or for their counterparts that we meet within the world of darkness itself. It is possible that titles like brave and adventurous weren't chosen because they already lean closer to that selfish darkness as opposed to the overcoming of a personal failing in courage. That personal failing being fear.
So Lunith, with the aid of a minor change, is pretty much set, finding his mirror in the Warrior of Conquest, the farthest stretch of this willful nature to explore and overcome.
Ark, who I think I've made some pretty good arguments, aligns more with the title Warrior of Courage, often follows his gut and stands up for himself, even if to very little avail. I think this could very easily translate to a dark umbrella term like Warrior of Pride, which for the shy and bullied Ark could be an overall positive as he learns his own worth, begins to understand his own achievements and value his own powers, instead of constantly leaning on his peers for validation.
Both Ingus and Refia give headstrong vibes,
Making both characters more malleable, in my opinion, when it comes to titles of both darkness and light. In fact, I do think both of them take on some dark-coded traits as we continue on throughout the story. But this isn't the first time we've seen this sort of like malleability within our characters. See the example in 1 of the villainous Garland, who started off as one of the best knights in the realm, or 2's example of the traitorous pirate Layla, who comes to join the rebels in reclaiming the kingdom, or Leon. Anyway, we're already dealing with a title like the Warrior of Affection for Ingus, and yes, I have officially swapped them. There's no going back. Affection to me reads as on a subsect of love. And love, in my opinion, is a little bit inherently selfish. In that equation, you either need to be the lover or the beloved, so you are putting yourself in that situation in one way or another. So I think pulling from that same umbrella and giving Ingus a title like the Warrior of Passion works really well. He is tempted to save the world because he wants to save the woman he loves. He is so passionate that he can follow his will rather than the will of his king. He is the one that is amply prepared to follow this fight to its conclusion, even if it kills him. Refia, on the other hand, struck me as a little bit more difficult once we started getting into some of these dark-themed titles. She is persistent, which some could classify as selfish. I didn't want to lean too much into certain aspects as they did seem to weaponize or vilify her femininity. So instead, I think something like the Warrior of Willfulness is a much more fitting title. She's persistent, she's self-righteous, she thinks that in every situation she holds the upper hand and is willing to continue to fight for those things that she believes are correct. I don't know, I think it's kind of a good fit. Was this just a silly exercise in synonyms? Yes, but I had fun.
Okay, back to that pregame FMV I mentioned. Now, this section will be short and sweet, as I do have to bring it up, seeing as it is one of my least favorite aspects of either version of the game, but I certainly do not have to milk it. Don't get me wrong, she is Gorgina. It sums up the same hopeful feeling very core to the plot elements they chose to highlight within the game. We see chocobos running against a clouded horizon that reveals an airship, and my mind is set on an enjoyable Final Fantasy time. But the characters, my god. Firstly, none of them act at all akin to the versions that make their way into the game. How can I, a professional internet dweeb, be so sure? Let's take a look. We see inter-party conflict unlike anything present within the game. Outside of some playful rowing, our gang of abandoned youths seems to get along swimmingly. And it isn't like there weren't enough opportunities. If you want Dingus and Lunith to fight, what about here? Or why not here? It really isn't that hard to add a couple more dialogue lines to add a little bit of that inter-party strife. Refia is done the dirtiest by the promotional materials, depicted primarily as a demure, loving white mage, something to ogle, and that is not the character we play. She has token girl energy for sure, let's not let that slide. If you replaced Maria with Refia halfway through 2, I probably wouldn't notice. Then again, Maria's most identifiable character trait is missing her brother, so after about 10 hours of no one mentioning Leon, I'm sure I'd have some questions. Regardless, Refia isn't afraid to confront those around her and make sure her thoughts are heard. You're telling me this girl sharing a tender look with Ingus and healing his wounds is the same girl who is intent on stealing her father's friendship and disappearing into the night? At least they consistently make Ark a little nerd, as my son ought to be. Plus, the Arya and Second Continent reveal, while not the most noticeable on a first-time watch, really does demote a huge plot reveal to a bit of aesthetic fodder.
Beautiful. Stunting. Love it. But
it isn't all bad. They do demonstrate some meaningful and easily identifiable party comps, and, I mean, like, who doesn't love an FMV? Okay, now, all of that is going to feel a little bit like stalling once we get to this exact point in the discussion. The Christianity question. Now, let me be so abundantly transparent here. I am not picking Christianity for no reason. Obviously, there is a wide breadth of direct and indirect allusions to a vast and varied base of religions and folklores within the franchise. But in this case, one does stand out amongst the rest, and plays a pretty pivotal part in the overall plot.
This is obviously reflective of a childhood spent in and around this influence. I'm sure I'd have more to say on some of the other iconic names within the series, if not for this blasted North American upbringing and a college course in Bible study. Don't ask.
And just so you know, I do treat religious analysis with the exact same gloves that I treat everything else. So on to the obvious. Noah and the flood. After a flood meant to take out all of mankind and return them to the void, one ship across the whole of the continent is saved. Inside of it, drifting to fulfill its purpose, are our 4 prophetic infantile heroes. While Noah's not directly aligned with the ark or flood in question, it is his namesake that opened up this route of analysis. So no, Noah is not allegorically Noah. In fact, he's much more of a god figure. One who has split his being amongst his 3 most devout, one of which shares his title, Master of Magic, one more ephemeral, taking on the comatose state of ruling the domain of dream, and one made flesh. Now, before you ask, this is an allusion for a reason. It is not meant to be a one-to-one to signal the direct allegory for the story of Christ. More realistically, it's an easy way to discuss the dichotomy of man, both the good and evil inherent in a mortal existence. Which brings up another part in play. Mankind's inability to see the greater plan. Within biblical passages, it is Jesus' trust of his Father above all else that allowed him to fulfill his part of this scheme by sacrificing himself. Zand is antithetically opposed to this trust in Noah. Rather, he reflects both God made flesh and the selfish and sinful race of man who would sacrifice the body of something they see as divine. The perversion of the earth crystal serves to evoke much of man's ties to the land that gives him life, which creates a narrative underpinning that exemplifies stories depicting the destruction of a holy idol in order for man to assert his power over things he does not understand. See the golden cow, the history of the Holy Shroud, or the expulsion from the garden for more complex examples. And as much as the Bible is read as a story of good versus evil, it is so much more complex than that, flexing the boundaries of truth, understanding, kindness, love, knowledge, just to observe what happens to man under both oppressive darkness and holy light. And can faith not just be seen as another form of darkness? Trust when there is no obvious truth? If that's so, how can the original state of Adam and Eve be seen akin to evil?
Okay, so we got a little theoretical there. So, Bible nerds, I do not need you going to the comment section to drop verse about how darkness is antithetical to the Lord's light, or the exposition of evil through the light of hope, or whatever. We're talking Old Testament here. We're talking specifically the story in which God drowns all of mankind, so...
Anyway, the warriors, both of light and darkness, are not opposed. They're merely forces joined to fight the void, or the annihilation of all things that have been created. Realistically, they behave more as prophets within this story, heralding the truth of what is playing out before us and acting within it under the power of something greater. Obviously, the cloud lavishing their snakes and perversely nude inhuman body is Lucifer-coded. Speaking of gods and men, let's trip back for a second to a discussion I briefly brought up earlier. That of the inability of monarchs within Final Fantasy to care for their people, and the inevitable evil, or the role that power plays in the susceptibility of their advisors to fall to darkness. To the lit nerds and media literate among us, they may see this as a very good parallel and a perfect line to draw. But for those in the audience that engage with media a little bit more literally, let's discuss the role of monarchs in power in fantasy. Monarchs, who historically have been notorious for claiming the role of God's chosen ruler and passing their power down familial lines, have very little say in their own lives, but often were charged with ruling the land, the church, and the military power of their nation. In this instance, there's no super defined worldwide religion, but we are made aware that the crown does pass by blood. See any Princess Sarah. As well as the fact that monarchs retain power over their land, people, and military forces. So, regardless of reasoning, we are made to understand that the monarchs are neither chosen by their people, nor put in a position of power by their own volition, instead simply bred to take on that position. This makes monarchs great patsy characters. They can still be likable even though they may be the only reason horrible things have befallen their people, but generals, advisors, and trusted courtsmen, and on the rare occasion monarchs turned warlords, are often turned to the side of evil within Final Fantasy titles. One can assert that the search for power is inherently evil within the world created. Whether or not these men in power positions were evil prior to the awakening of darkness, they were naturally pulled towards the accruing of more power once it was. This is also why many of our early game heroes are prophetic ones. They don't have to search for power, but rather had responsibility thrust upon them. The alternative to monarchy still relies on people of means vying for power, using empty words and empty promises to placate the people, and even unabused of the monarch's inability to leave their position of power. This is a theme we've seen in the previous two stories, and we will continue to see build as we work our way through the series, playing on both of our party members and plots. Enough sacrilege, back to the important bit. The ranking. Talking so extensively about these two variants of the games and how different they are, their achievement list, the job system, characters, and story-based scenes, is making me think I need to rank them individually. Don't worry, we will be doing each part side by side to compare and contrast, and we will be using the same metrics we've used in the previous two videos. That being level progression, story, music, and use of Final Fantasy tropes. So let's go. I never thought I would regain my childlike adoration of Google slide presentations, but here we are. We'll be talking about the games in the order that they came out. So, the first score belonging to the Freelancers version, or the 3DDS, the second to the Onion Knight version, the Pixel Remaster release. Level progression. Woof. This is the first game that has had significant holds on gameplay in exchange for leveling. It is balanced and written to explicitly take this much time. Had I played it when I was friendless and 8, see the childhood Google Slides comment, I would have loved the deliberate passing out of jobs and the need to go on serious grinds to be able to take on the next fight without breaking a sweat. But I'm old enough to have taxes to file, and this version of me doesn't appreciate 15 hours of my time being consumed by required grinding. Not to mention the level collection is slow for exactly how many levels need to be gained across jobs. This is on top of purposefully crippling the player when job swapping. But it isn't without reason, and you can fully bulldoze your way through some of the more complicated fights without following the game's suggestions. It is a great sign of things to come, but not masterfully done within the context of 3. That on top of the fact that no matter your level, you probably aren't prepared for the grueling final dungeon sprint, I'd say leveling in 3 aren't the best of friends. If I gave 1 a C for story, you best bet this is getting the middle of the road treatment as well. But get ready for them Goldilocks to be revealed, because unfortunately, the ease of the Onion Knight version is not a super immense improvement. Of course, the Pixel Remaster adds the easy-to-access Gil and XP boost buttons, but taking the gameplay on face value, it falls into some similar issues. In the wrong direction. While the game contains the same hints and stall points, they aren't nearly as needed with the difficulty decrease, or the quote-unquote rebalancing act, we've seen throughout the remasters. This takes the wind out of the words of bystanders when it no longer feels like an actual life or death task to level all of your character's Dragoon jobs to 10 before you even consider taking on Garuda. None of the bosses feel as challenging, with a few exceptions. Honestly, the lack of job reassignment debuff is a general benefit, as well as Auto-Battler. Ugh, Auto-Battler makes the grinding far less grating with a set it and forget it setting available. Very
very inoffensive upgrades that result in an easier and faster version of one of my least favorite Final Fantasies. I'll take it. This level progression gets a B. Music. Woof. I know, talk about real sacrilege. But just go and listen to Saronia or Flight of the Enterprise. Mayhaps this friendly games reviewer doesn't like upbeat high BPM bops, but I don't think that's the case. There are plenty of bombastic tunes I do enjoy from this track list, but this has been the first Final Fantasy playthrough where I became very aware of how grating some of these pieces were over long periods of time, and somewhat seriously considered putting on something else entirely. Don't get too mad at me, nerds. This version gets a B. But that is only because the Pixel Remaster, which also houses the original tracks, wasn't nearly as upsetting. Unexpectedly, I actually really liked the MIDI score of the exact same tracks I hated in the DS release. And the full-throated recomposition of the Pixel Remaster clings much harder to the original structure, resulting in some pretty stunning numbers. Onion Knight music? That's an S, baby. Story. Okay, so this is where we get a bit of a switch up in the scores, and is 100% the reason people still suggest that the Tri-Curious play the DS version for any reason. So let's get into this story. I love my goofy little guys. Their characterization results in cute and meaningful interactions with a world that they are now responsible for saving. Their relationships and interactions with other characters makes the player care for their surrogate children. Or new best friends. Age dependent. I think the pacing is perfectly acceptable to get your characters from children running from every fight that is even a tad challenging, to going out of their way to beat up mythical creatures for fun, and figureheads of vague and evil concepts because they must. The story is wholesome. It's full of hope and the silly interactions of youth. I think it's a really beautiful and touching story that does not feel super serious. None of the story beats feel life-threatening, outside of the great ghosting in the first stack, and the world of darkness at the very end of the game, which serves as your warrior's real and final challenge. Very few townspeople are concerned with an upcoming doom none of them know anything about, which in and of itself is a very interesting concept for a game about the end of the world. Something, the responsibilities of the few, something, don't want widespread panic while we're handling it, but even those that know about this coming apocalypse seem pretty relaxed. We don't even see any of the racialized or sect-specific tensions of the previous entries, like that of the mermaids and ancients in 1. And I feel like I don't even need to bring up the widespread panic and terror of 2 that reached all but the ends of the world with the tumultuous war efforts. It feels a hair too playful and a touch too childlike in its telling. Touching, but a little empty, like a hug from someone who simply doesn't know you that well. Gonna net it a B. As opposed to our Onion Knights over here. I feel like I shouldn't even waste your time because story? What story? This version feels much closer to 1's unknowable heroes and unrelenting but overall irrelevant plot. Except this time the characters talk. Which one? Who knows? Your gross amalgam of onion kids needs you to exert your own logic and characterizations onto them to make them feel at all real. They have less of a lasting relationship with any of the characters that come to their aid in the final act, so just like its empty predecessor, this is gonna get a C from me. Now, for the use of tropes, and when I say tropes, I do mean other series staples. I'm not sticking to a hard and fast definition of tropes for this metric. There are actually very few differences between the versions, so we're doing one slide with everything broken down. We got jobs. We get 18 final boss fights. We got Sid. We got more airships than you can count on one hand. Chocobos, moogles, crystals, oh my, orphans and ancients and mysterious tech abound. On a more serious note, this is also the first time we get a good versus evil plotline that does not boil down to something as obvious as dark versus light, and provides for us a more defined example of power not always being an inherent good, as demonstrated in both of the previous entries. That, alongside the use of prophecy, the power of friendship, that's gonna get a big, beautiful A for you both. You guys know these themes are done better, and characters embody their stories better in many other entries. So let's close this one out so we can get into those titles instead. Okay, controversially, I've decided to combine these scores. I know I just put y'all through twice the amount of analysis, but let's be transparent here. These games feel quite similar. Do you want a challenging experience with pre-written plot and characters? Play the DS version. Do you want to check it off a list and like the other remastered projects? Stick with the Pixel Remaster bundle. Grab all 6 on Steam. I would argue that unless you come to JRPGs looking for a tough grind fest, the Pixel Remaster is the better version overall. Or you could also be like me, a dweeb for characters and touching relationships, then go ahead, pop on this chibi nightmare and fall in love with your new adopted children. Overall, both versions of Final Fantasy III end up in the B tier.
Which honestly I think is fair. Nothing in this game made my blood boil quite as much as Leon, nor did it surpass the first game on merits of the job system alone. Overall, it's bland and can be downright painful at times, but by the time you do finally beat this baboobled demon and hear that last message of hope, your irony-soaked heart will too be filled with a saccharine warmth.
I'm making that broad strokes assessment considering you did just spend an hour and a half of your free time watching a video essay dissection of Final Fantasy III.
We are the hope the world needs. Us acting towards a better tomorrow, caring for one another, fighting for our rights, and finding things to enjoy are all working towards the goal of providing this bright and ephemeral flame that we call humankind with the hope it needs to get through another day. Do not let darkness overtake you, even in the worst of times, because time comes for us all, so make today count. I had more to say, but Ramuh's beard. If the video on 3 is this long, just imagine 4. Speaking of, I hope you guys are ready, because it is almost his time. Thank you all for your continued support and kind comments. I do genuinely hope that these videos are as fun for you guys to watch as they are for me to make. Granted, buying several copies of the exact same game to play back to back is not cheap. So if you would like to financially support your local online yapper, I do have a Ko-fi account set up. Or you can continue your support in all of the normal ways, like, comment, share if you want, subscribe to this channel, or come hang out over on Twitch at twitch.tv/unlucky_clovers with the rest of my spirit guides. Or you can simply join the Discord to daily spam, "Where's the next video, loser?" Whatever floats your boat. All of those links and more can be found in the description down below. I'd call it the doobly-doo, but I do think that would age me quite a bit. Anyway, I hope to see you guys all in the next one.